The day we carried the last box down the stairs, the hallway smelled like detergent from a neighbor's laundry and faint frying onions from somewhere below, and the building door stuttered against its old spring, as if the hinge was reluctant to let us go, and I kept balancing that soft cardboard box marked winter clothes, even though it was late spring, my palms sweaty against the tape. My arms buzzing with the sort of muscle tiredness that feels earned, but still a little humiliating, because I knew it wasn't the weight but the meaning. And I could feel my heart counting steps like a metronome set slightly too fast. 6 floors, no elevator, the stairwell light time to blink off every 40 seconds, forcing me to nudge the switch with an elbow and bathe the concrete in that sudden yellow that made dust look like snow in a beam of streetlight. And I remember thinking about all the mornings when the heater had clicked awake in our small home, the radiator ticking like it had knuckles, and how the windows in winter would sweat and the sill would be cold enough that you could draw a circle with a fingertip and leave it as a little portal. And it was all ours, not grand, but ours, and now we had to give the key back with a smile that would be polite and not bitter, and the smile felt like a tiny part of risk management. A phrase I used to throw around when I tracked numbers in a spreadsheet and told myself that life was a kind of portfolio if you chose to believe it. But on that stairwell, it didn't feel like a portfolio. It felt like boxes and tilt and breath, and my wife's quiet steps behind me in the knowledge that we were going somewhere smaller, lower, and that the first day would be the hardest unless it wasn't. Unless it was just one of a series of hard days that crowd each other like unpaid bills on a kitchen counter. We had been careful in the beginning, or at least we told ourselves that we were, and I kept receipts in an envelope and a few in the drawer with the rubber bands and matchbox. And once a week I spread them like picture cards on the table with little numbers penciled in the corners the way my father used to score family card games, and I felt a comfort in stacking things, the faint scratch of graphite, the paper edges dry against my fingers. The scent of cheap printing ink that clung to the fingertips if you touched the merchant copy too long, and I thought that discipline would be the difference between us and the stories you hear in the coffee shop near my building, when someone leans in too close to a stranger and says, "How did it happen?" But discipline proved to be a thin blanket over a cold night when the wind changes. And for us, the wind changed in slow currents that felt at first like normal weather and later, like a leak you notice only because your ankles are wet. A small cut in income, a little dent in the plan, a repair here, a prescription there, a fee that arrived like an uninvited cousin with a grin you cannot refuse. And then the morning I realized my contract wouldn't be renewed, the call with the polite phrases and the confused apology from my boss who sounded more tired than cruel. And for a week I told myself it was fine, that there was a bridge to cross, and I walked to the bridge every day in my head, but there was no planks laid out yet. Only air and hopeful math scribbled in the notebook that had once carried tentative budgets and suddenly needed to carry survival. We cut a few things first: the easy fat coffee to go, the snack that pretends to be a meal, the streaming channel that we barely watched, and we cooked more rice and beans with a slice of carrot and a bay leaf to pretend at ceremony, and we looked at the insurance and asked what the minimum would be, and the letters kept sliding under the door with that soft glide against the floor tiles, white with windows where our name appeared black and official, and I stacked them too because stacking is my habit. But the stacks became towers, and the towers leaned, and I realized there is a tone of envelope that carries a smell like dust and a threat, and if you open it, the paper clicks between your fingers with static that feels like a warning. I used the word debt sparingly in those days, as if naming it too clearly might invite more of it to sit on the couch and put feet on the table, but it had already claimed a spot in the corner, and it watched us count coins from the jar we used to call the travel fund when we were still making jokes over breakfast, and it watched me do the brave thing of logging into an old account where I had once pretended to be clever with cryptocurrencies. And the login page recognized me, but the numbers didn't. A fraction of a fraction bowing to the same numbers I had once praised in my head like a god of possibility. And I sold the crumbs because they were a symbol more than a property, and the small sum they turned into could buy groceries for a week if you walked slow and chose things you could stretch into different shapes. Cabbage into soup, and then into pancakes, and then into a side dish. And bread stale enough to toast and rub with garlic and pretend it was a specialty at a place we used to occasional visit on weekends when we thought we were building passive income through little experiments. The afternoon we signed the notice, I didn't say much, and neither did my wife, and the building super didn't really look at us. He just pointed at the calendar and said the date, and the hallway smelled like polish, and the click of his ring against the key hung in the blank space between us. And later I stood in our kitchen, with the late sun making the counter look cleaner than it was, and I ran my finger over a tiny burn mark where the kettle had sat too long once. And I thought about what leaving means when you pack the wrong things: the sentimental weight of a chipped mug, the notebook with pages only half used, the heavy winter coat in spring that still feels like duty. And I thought about how when you are out of a place you can never quite restore the exact sounds it made for you: the pipes at 6 a.m., the neighbor's music that was always a bit too low to make out but too high to ignore, the squeak of the door you kept meaning to oil. And I took a breath and decided I would make new sounds somewhere else and teach myself to be gentle with them. The new place had one long room and a small kitchen corner that might once have been a closet because the wall was lumpy in the way old paint gets when it has seen different colors over time and 1,000 careless brush strokes. And the fridge had a light that flickered awake like a small theater lamp and hummed with dignity. And the tiles underfoot were cool in the morning and picked up my footprints when I came out of the shower and left the bath mat just out of reach because I was still learning where things belong. And the window faced a back courtyard with a rusted bicycle that had no seat but still stood proud against the drainpipe, and a strip of grass that wanted to be a garden but was too narrow to host ambition. The first nights felt thinner than usual, maybe because we had no curtains yet, and the night pressed against the glass like a cat wanting in, and I lay awake and counted the breaths by the creak of the building, pipes murmuring, some neighbor's late dishwashing running like a small river that did not invite us but did not harm us either. And I listened to my wife's steady breathing and felt ashamed every time it hitched and then evened out again as if she were practicing courage in her sleep. And I promised silently that I would make a plan that could hold us even if it was built from old spiral notebook paper and the stub of a pencil. I spent a morning at the table with the soft light from the window making a rectangle on the wood, and I wrote the word budget at the top, not because it would be perfect, but because it would be a compass. And I used envelopes again, but this time I used fewer categories: groceries, transit, utilities, one called kindness, because I decided that cutting kindness was a form of bankruptcy I did not want to practice. And I put a few coins in that envelope and told myself that once a week we would buy something that served no plan except to remind us we were more than a spreadsheet: a small bouquet of cheap flowers, a wedge of cheese that looked imported even if it wasn't, a small coffee at the cafe near our building where the menu board was written in looping chalk, and the steam from the milk hung in the air like soft weather, and I would linger over the cup and reckon with what I had done and what I could do. I found work that did not pretend to be a career, a shift at the warehouse that smelled like cardboard and machine oil and Friday fatigue, where my hands learned the pattern of sealing tape and my back learned the measure of an honest ache, and when I came home late, I would wash my hands and watch the water run cloudy at first and then clear and then steam fade from the mirror, and I would put on the laundry, the machine shuddering with that familiar growl that is both reassurance and complaint. And I would fold shirts at the table with quiet attention, because the crispness of a line down a sleeve can be a form of meditation if you let it. And I realized that the act of smoothing cotton with your palms can calm a brain that has been chasing numbers all day, and that even financial terms like credit and debt felt less monstrous when the towels nested in their small stack and the drawer closed without resistance. There were bad days still, of course, like the morning a bill I had forgotten appeared with a fee attached that made it look like it had grown a tumor, and I wanted to argue with the paper, tell it that the timing was cruel, but paper does not listen, it only holds ink, so I brewed tea and sat a little and let the anger pass like a weather front, and then I called the number printed in small font and explained that I had made a mistake. And the person on the other end was either new or kind or both, and the fee was reduced, and I took the difference and put half into the utility envelope and half into kindness, because life felt less like hunger when some ritual of grace was allowed to sit at the table with us. An afternoon in late summer, I went to a local market just to walk, to touch vegetables without buying too many, to smell peach and dust and the sharp sweetness of dill, and I watched people carry their lives in cotton bags, and I found a cheap shirt for work, second-hand but clean, and I bought it with coins and the receipt printed warm and curled in my hand like a curled leaf, and I thought about how the stock market is just a large room where people guess about harvests and storms. And how my small harvest was a shirt I could wear and a tomato I would slice thin over bread with salt, and that knowledge made me feel less like a failure and more like a person who had redefined returns. My partner in the app I once dreamed about sent me a message that was mostly silence wrapped in politeness, and I imagined the code sitting there in a repository like a boat nobody had the courage to push into the water, and I felt the loss as a texture behind my ribs but not a wound anymore, more like a bruise you stop guarding because everything else demands your hands, and I allowed myself one page in the notebook to write what went wrong and what I would do differently. Not to punish, but to learn, and I was strict about the next page being for groceries, because analysis cannot feed you unless you buy onions and rice, and a jar of spices you can stretch over weeks. Sometimes at dawn, the air in the courtyard is cool in the way that makes your neck tighten in a small shiver, and the pigeons hop sideways like they forgot what direction means, and the neighbor on the second floor waters a plant that is braver than its pot, and I stand at the window with coffee that smells like a plan and look at the small rectangle of sky and think about my father's old phrase about carrying your weather inside, and I test it by thinking of a day when I am kinder to myself. And the sky does not change color, but I feel less like I am wearing a heavy coat in July. I keep a ledger now that is almost plain, just dates and numbers, and a note about the feeling beside some entries, like the day I sent a little extra to the smallest debt to chase the snowball effect I read about. And the note said a word I haven't used much in months, lightness, and maybe. That is not a finance term, but it is an investment in the kind of person I want to be. And sometimes the ledger says winter boots fund, and sometimes it says medicine, and sometimes it says one pastry because kindness still has a line item, and sometimes kindness is a flaky triangle that leaves crumbs on the napkin and smiles in the eyes of the person who hands it to you without judgment. The landlord of the new place is a quiet man with a weathered coat and a habit of cleaning his fingernails with a key when he waits for the boiler to do its job, and he fixes things strangely, like he leans heavy into a hinge and whispers nothing, and then the door stops squeaking, and once he nodded at my stack of folded clothes and said nothing, and I felt seen by the silence, and I added a line to the kindness envelope for a holiday gift, even if it would be small. Because integrity felt like putting money where gratitude lives. We gave away a few boxes we never unpacked, old plastic things that had seemed necessary in the bigger home, but looked like clutter in this place, and we breathed easier, and I noticed how the walls, although bumpy, held light in a soft way in late afternoon when the sun would slip behind the opposite building and leave us with a diffuse glow that made even the old electrical outlet look like a character in a friendly tale. And we learned to place the table so the leg didn't wobble and to keep the chair from scraping too loudly, and to open the window at an angle to avoid the door slamming in a draft, and all these microspecific skills become a stitched pocket where dignity can rest. On Sundays, we go to a small park and walk along a line of plane trees and watch dogs throw themselves into the morning with the shameless joy we once had for weekends. And then we stop by the supermarket and read the yellow labels that whisper about discounts, and we carry home bread and a bottle of oil and sometimes a lemon to make the simplest food taste like care. And as I slice and stir and wait for the water to simmer, I think about how I used to scroll news about Bitcoin like a gambler reading the weather of a faraway sea and call it learning. And now I read water and oil and bubbles and imagine futures less as price curves and more as meals. And I still believe in investments. I am just investing attention where I used to invest impatience. There is a radiator that clanks twice at night as if shrugging off a memory, and when it does I wake briefly and reach for the notebook and write one sentence I want to carry into morning. Sometimes it is as simple as be soft or fold the towels early, and sometimes it is more pointed, like call the utility about the meter because the estimate is wrong. And the next day I call and I keep my voice even and the person on the line speaks in terms I learned to respect, kilowatt, usage, adjustment. And when they agree to a lower estimate, I whisper thank you to nobody and put the difference into the envelope marked winter boots, and I can almost feel the warmth enter through the soles of a pair that doesn't yet exist. I found a part-time shift in the late evening at a small print shop where the machines hum in a tone that is almost musical, and the paper stacks tall and clean, and the smell is a marriage between ink and dust and the hesitation of new customers. And I like to brush my palm across the top sheet to feel the texture and guess the weight. And I carry home scrap paper that would be recycled anyway and turn it into lists or practice sheets where I write the same sentence over and over like a quiet prayer. You are not defined by the apartment you left, and under it I sometimes write a number because my brain likes the anchor of numbers, and I think that this is another form of risk management, to tether the intangible to the tangible, to say a feeling and then give it a measure like how many minutes of overtime it took to pay the water bill, how many steps it is to the bus stop, how many breaths between the first panic of morning and the first sip of coffee that persuades the day to be gentle. I keep a movable altar of sorts on the windowsill, not mystic, just a few objects that point at better choices. The tiny screwdriver that fixed the loose hinge on the cupboard, A bus ticket from the week I learned a new route that shaved off 10 minutes and saved a little on transfers. A sprig of rosemary borrowed from a shrub on the sidewalk, where the smell made my fingers feel like summer even in late fall, and a coin from a country I have not visited. A reminder that not all value is spendable here and now, that some value is a story waiting its turn, and I suppose that is what I am building, a story where the middle is heavy but not fatal. I read somewhere that credit is trust with paperwork, and I think about how I want to be the kind of person who extends credit to himself in the morning, who signs his own promise with a small nod and a warm cup, and does not berate himself when the promise is late but keeps walking to the bus anyway. And in doing so, he learns that the most reliable asset is the pattern he stitches into the hours, the rhythm of cleaning the stovetop after cooking. The way the rag smells faintly like lemon and persistence, the discipline of drying the sink so water spots do not anchor gloom. Some nights I lie awake and listen to the city rumble like a stomach that is never fully fed, and I make a list of what we lost, and I let myself feel sad in a clean way, not as a punishment, but as a kind of respect, because that home held our first winter together, and the sound of laughter at a joke I cannot recall, and the press of feet against the door as we kicked off muddy shoes. And the shape of our shadows on the wall during nights when summer found us too warm to sleep, and we moved like fish in a slow current. And then I list what we found. The surprise of a small balcony that is barely a ledge but holds one pot of time that refuses to die, the way laundry smells when it dries by the open window and the air shrugs through the shirt sleeves, the dignity of a paid bill, the taste of tomatoes with salt after a long shift. And I realize that while wealth has been kinder to other people at other times, my abundance is learning to be content with less drama, and that might be its own profit. Sometimes I pick up a free magazine outside the tram station because they always have lists of jobs that nobody dreams of doing, and I circle a few and send my details, and the phone does not ring often, but when it does I answer with a tone that's practiced and not desperate, and I go to interviews with a clean shirt and quiet shoes, and the kind of calm you borrow from doing dishes slowly. And when the answer is no, I buy a small apple with coins and eat it while leaning against the rail by the canal and watch the water reflect sky like an accounting ledger reflecting a life. And I decide that the work I now do is not a failure but a bridge, and that the stability I can construct is not fragile if I keep my expectations measured and my steps deliberate. I have a friend who used to talk hot about startups and valuations, and he does not call as much. But once in a while, he sends a link to an article about a major exchange crash or a fund that was not a fund. And I read the lines and I try to feel outrage, but all I feel is distance, like I am standing on a quiet street and a parade is going by in another country, and I am relieved because my heart is tired of parades. And I would rather watch my wife water the rosemary on the windowsill and leave a small wet circle on the saucer and smell it in the air and feel that this is a return on something that is not quoted or listed. I try to keep one project for the future, small and not public, a folder on my laptop with a clean name that has no swagger, where I keep notes about a practical service I might one day offer if time and savings and luck align. And inside there are only plain documents, no pitch deck, no big ask, just steps, tools, a list of what I would need to learn and what I already know, and a line at the bottom that says do not borrow money for this unless the budget demonstrates mercy. And I feel good when I open that folder, not because it promises wealth, but because it rises from the same soil as the folded shirts and the envelopes, a discipline that promises to be careful with dreams. On winter mornings, the air tastes metallic and clean, and my breath makes a small cloud in the courtyard when I shake the rug, and I notice the sound of the tram bell in the distance, and the old bicycle against the drainpipe now has snow on its handlebar like a small white glove, and I find myself telling time by these small markers more than by the clock. And when I return to the kitchen, the kettle sings and I pour, and it is not a cafe latte poured by a cheerful barista in a place filled with laptops and ambition. It is black tea with a slice of lemon and a spoon of honey, and it is enough. And I take my cup to the table and open the notebook and add a line to today's plan, and I write down that I will call a person about a second-hand desk because we can no longer keep eating and working at the same table without feeling cramped. And the desk will be cheap and scuffed, and it will feel like a new room inside our small room. And I think about space not as square meters but as decisions, and this thought makes me smile. The mailbox still sometimes holds envelopes with the gravity of debt, and I do not kid myself that we are out of the woods, but the woods feel greener and less full of eyes, and the path underfoot is clearer now that I set stones along the way, small rituals to guide me back home if I get lost, and my fear is no longer a monster that demands tribute, but a small animal that needs warmth and structure. And when it squeaks, I fold a towel or cook soup or walk to the park, and notice the crack in the pavement shaped like a river on a map, and I remind myself that endurance is a form of wealth that does not inflate or burst, and that the only stocks I can buy without money are the hours I decide not to set on fire with jealousy or regret. I do not resent the man I used to be who talked easily about cryptocurrencies and passive income and startups, because he taught me to notice patterns even if he chased the wrong ones, and he kept receipts and learned to sharpen a pencil without breaking the lead, and he cared about the way numbers could tell a story, and his only sin was mistaking speed for wisdom, and I forgive him the way you forgive someone you still live with, and I invite him to help fold laundry. Because his hands still remember how to smooth cloth when he stops trying to perform competence and just serves the moment. There are days when I wake up before the alarm and hear the city yawn, and I step into the kitchen and the tile is cold, and I feel alive in the way a swimmer feels alive standing at the edge before diving into water that might be colder than expected, and I stretch and open the window and the air comes in and lifts the curtain like a slow breath, and I promise myself to be low and patient and precise today, and I think if I can keep this promise the future will be easier to talk to when it knocks. And if I falter, I will still wash the dishes and wipe the table and put coins in kindness and go to sleep in a bed that has clean sheets. When we visit our old street by accident because a bus route changed and I look up at the windows that once held our winter light, I feel a pull and a softness, and I imagine the current occupants unpacking a set of plates that do not match and laughing when one wobbles on the uneven counter, and I wish them a gentle budget and a heater that ticks without complaint. And I turn away not with bitterness, but with a sense that the story continues without us, and that is fine. Because our story continues here, with lines of tiny victories and quiet maintenance, and a kind of hope that does not shout. And as we walk away, my wife squeezes my hand in the way that says yes, and maybe we do not say the word, but we both hear it inside, and I carry it back to the small place that is cleaner than any place we could have paid for, in a hurry, and warmer than any place we could have rented with a louder door. If the future brings back surplus, we will not waste it on noise. We will buy time and cushions and a better kettle. We will pay for classes, not clothes. We will fix the window latch with care, not speed. And we will hold on to our rituals because they cost little and return much. And when I fall asleep now, I do so not as a man who lost his compass, but as a man who learned to navigate by the taste of morning air and the weight of coins in an envelope and the hum of a second-hand fridge that sounds like an engine starting modestly. And in the thin quiet before sleep, I feel something that does not need a name, only a place to sit near me. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how global our community is. Comment your country down below, share this story to your friends, and leave a like and subscribe for more episodes like this.